The year was 1957. My father was 2, and every kid for Christmas wanted a Frisbee. Buddy Holly and Elvis Presley were ruling the radio, and in the city of Philadelphia, something else would be synonymous with that year. On February 25th, 1957, a young boy was found on a dirt road in a J.C. Penney box in the Fox Chase section of Philadelphia. Officer Elmer Palmer would be one of the first officers on the scene. He would discover a small, blonde child wrapped in a blanket, lying in a cardboard box. Here are a couple pictures of the scene as it was back then and how it looks today. The days and weeks after the discovery of the body would be crucial in finding the killer. But at this point in time, the police were focused on at least finding out who the child was and going from there. Unfortunately, movies and television spoil us into every child murder and every cold case being solved. That, most of the time, is not the case, unfortunately. Autopsy report findings were: it was a 4 to 6 year old male, identified by his baby teeth. He was 3.5 feet, 30 pounds. He was bruised extremely, no broken bones. His hair was cut crudely, possibly in a rush. He had 7 surgical scars on his chest, his groin, and his ankle. His eyes showed signs of liquid dilation and being exposed to ultraviolet lights. His nails were clipped on his toes and his fingers. He had an effect on his hands and his feet known as washerwoman effects. I'm sure that's not socially accepted in this day and age with autopsy reports, but it is severe pruning of the toes and the fingers. The doctor said he died from blunt force trauma. Nothing was in his stomach, but did show signs of vomiting. The search was on. In the coming weeks, police would begin a citywide search and throw every idea imaginable out to try to obtain the slightest lead. With no fingerprint matches and no missing reports filled, 400,000 flyers were sent out with utility bills. 270 police recruits were sent out in a grid pattern search. Unfortunately, the only thing that was found was a handkerchief and a blue cap. Even as macabre as it seemed, live photos of the boy were taken. Makeup was applied and clothes were put on. The boy was sat upright to recreate what the boy may have looked like before his death. Then, of course, there was always the evidence that was recovered at the scene and at the grid search. Firstly, the blanket, but it turns out it was manufactured in 2 countries and shipped countrywide. Then there was the blue cap. Was traced back to a shop, 2603 South 7th Street in South Philadelphia, by a Miss Hannah Robbins. Now I know it says 2605, but it's the building to the left in the blue awning. She recalls making the cap because it had a unique leather strap on the back, as per requested by the customer. She described him as a male, 20s to his early 30s. He paid in cash and wasn't seen again. Lastly, the box. This box was traced back to a J.C. Penney store in Upper Darby. Since November 1956, 12 of these boxes came into that store. 11 were sold and 9 were recovered. Unfortunately, in the 50s, it was the time of cash, not many debit or credit cards or anything of that nature. So most of the leads came up empty. The 9 were recovered either by people bringing in the box or the bassinet in fear the cops would be coming towards the door.
My dream came true.
As the physical evidence led to nowhere, the police started questioning their suspects. Frederick Bonosus found the boy a day prior in the police. His excuse was he was checking his muskrat traps and discovered the boy, but didn't want to be held accountable for the murder. He then changed the story again, saying he was driving his vehicle down the road coming home from LaSalle University where he was a student. A rabbit darted out in front of his car. He pulled over to check the well-being of the animal and discovered the boy. And then finally, his story was he parked his car and came down here to the Good Shepherd Home for Girls to creep on them. The Good Shepherd Home for Girls was ran by the Sisters of the Good Shepherd for troubled teens or girls that didn't have a home. Frederick Bonosus would be the boy of many tales. And as I'm showing here, there's just some remnants of the former home. It's either a statue or a sculpture that was there. After all these stories, I'm sure you can agree that there were some red flags that were raised. Frederick Bonosus was asked to take a lie detector test, but believe it or not, he passed with flying colors. Detective William Kelly of the Philadelphia Police Department even went as far as wondering if the boy was even from the States. In October 1956, there was a failed revolt in Hungary that resulted in 11,000 refugees migrating to the United States. As Detective Kelly found out, it was actually 11,205, as he went through every immigration photo. He actually thought he found the family that migrated to North Carolina, but a trip out there put that theory to rest, as the boy in the picture answered the door and said, "Sir, that's a very nice car." Remington Bristow was the head medical investigator of the case. He also spent 36 years on it. As testimony from his family, he carried a death mask of the boy in his briefcase for the rest of his life. He was a man that didn't want to let go. In researching the subject, I listened to a lot of audio and watched a lot of documentaries. This was on a 60-minute episode in 1994. This is the Nicoletti Foster Home. And a little bit later, I'll discuss why this was so important to find and even more to go. Arthur Nicoletti and his wife Anna lived there with 8 foster children and Anna's stepdaughter Anna. As Bristow investigated the house, they refused to cooperate. They wouldn't answer questions, let police on property, and refused to take a lie detector test. As progress moved forward, something would bring Bristow back here. But even if Remington Bristow at that time thought there was more meat on the bone to investigate, he was called off because there was nothing really warranted, a search warrant, or any further investigation of the property.
You never give me hot.
The evidence, the suspects, the flyers, the macabre pictures, nothing worked. In weeks to come, they would finally bury the unknown boy. With police, volunteers, and Philadelphia patrons gathered at Potter's Field, Northeast Philadelphia, they finally laid the boy with no name to rest. In the coming years, there would be calls and leads, if you wanted to call them that, but nothing would stick. Here are some before and after pictures of the ground. The Potter's Field is now a soccer field in Northeast Philadelphia. The 60s and 70s and the 80s would come and go, and the boy would still remain without a name.
Come shining through for you. Light up your face with gladness. Hide every trace of sadness. Although a tear may be ever so near, that's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.
The year was 1998, and DNA was solving more cases than Columbo. Womp womp. So a society that went by the name of Vidco, Society of Philadelphia, asked permission for the case of the unknown boy to be reopened. The boy was unearthed, and tooth enamel was extracted from his teeth. For the first time in this storied case, we had something that could bring something to light. The DNA would be put in a database, and if anything matched it, the program would come up with a hit. Hopefully, something could be finally figured out or solved. This is Ivy Hill Cemetery, and if you're wondering why I'm showing it to you, this is why. 40 years later, a funeral was held, and a reburial was issued to the boy that everyone knew everything, but not really about. The investigators that were still alive, along with Philadelphia brass, gathered to lay the boy again to rest with hopeful thoughts of possibly finding answers. In 2000, Philadelphia police received a call from a woman in Ohio who wanted to remain nameless. She was given the name Lady M. She claimed to grow up in Lower Merion and was raised by 2 school teachers. In the year 1954, she went with her mother to a lady's house. At the door, she seen her mother give an envelope of cash and received a child. For the next 2.5 years, the child was abused and kept in the basement. The child made noises but did not speak. One day, the boy was in the kitchen and he threw up beans. In a fit of rage, the mother pushed the boy down the steps and killed him. He was then wrapped in a blanket and taken to a dirt road where he was placed in a box. Now I know what you're thinking. Perfect story, right? In a 2-year investigation, it was determined that Lady M had a history of mental illness, and her story was incredibly suspect. But then again, if it was true, would you really blame her for having a mental disorder after seeing that? Do you remember when I showed you that Nicoletti foster home and I said I'd show you something later that was pretty important? Well, check this out. In a case that does not have a happy ending, this is the most up-to-date picture of what possibly the boy looked like when he was alive. While reading through one of the police reports, Lady M was asked what the boy's name was. She replied, Jonathan. Two of the investigators that had been on this case for 40 plus years burst into tears of joy and had to excuse themselves from the room. Yeah, sure, the story turned out to be tainted, but for that time, for them investigators to put a name to a face had to be absolutely awesome. There's still people working on this case, believe it or not, and they deserve all the credit in the world. Thank you for watching, and take care.